The crystal ballroom of Thorn Dominion had never held so many alphas at once. Seren pressed herself against the cold marble of the service corridor, her white cane silent in her grip, her heart slamming against her ribs as the gala unfolded on the other side of the wall. She could not see the chandeliers burning above the main floor. She could not see the 1,000 faces that had come to witness this moment. But she could hear. She could smell. She could feel. And tonight, all three were enough. She should not have come. Every instinct screamed at her to leave the corridor she had slipped through using a staff badge that was no longer hers, to return to the little room she had been hiding in for 3 days, waiting for Rylan to send word. He had sent nothing. No message. No voicemail. Only silence. And so she had come to hear it for herself. She could picture him even without her sight. The broad shoulders beneath the custom black jacket, the sharp cut of his jaw, the dark hair that fell across his forehead when he was too tired to fix it. She had traced every line of his face with her fingertips 100 times, memorizing him in a way sighted women never bothered to. For 7 months, she had known a side of him that no board member, no shareholder, and no tabloid photographer had ever seen. The man who whispered her name like a prayer when he thought she was asleep. The man whose hands trembled when he pressed them to her cheek. The man who had lowered his mouth to the curve of her hip and given her the secret mark, the claiming bite he had sworn would belong to no one else. "When the board is satisfied," he had murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "I will bring you into the light. You will be my wife, Seren. Nothing will change that." She had believed him. Her hand drifted instinctively to her lower belly, where a different secret was growing. A secret she had rehearsed 100 times in front of the bathroom mirror. A secret she had planned to tell him tonight, after the gala, when he came to her, as he always did. "The candidates will now be presented," a polished voice announced through the sound system, carrying through the wall with perfect clarity. Seren's nails bit into her palms as she heard the soft rustle of gowns crossing the floor. 5 women, daughters of the most powerful corporate PACs in the country, each one groomed since childhood for exactly this possibility. And at the center of them, if the whispers in the news feeds had been true, walked Vesper Halloran. The crowd hummed with approval. The Halloran family controlled the western shipping ports, commanded a private security force of more than 3,000, and had been positioning their eldest daughter toward Thorn Dominion for nearly a decade. Seren listened for Ryland. Any sound of the man she knew. A shift of weight. A tightened breath. The small throat clearing he did when he was about to speak from the heart. The silence on the other side of the wall was hollow. "Ryland Thorn, head of Thorn Dominion, heir to the Blackridge bloodline," the announcer intoned. "You have heard the council of the Pack elders. You have reviewed the covenant terms. The witness hall awaits your word." The pause stretched like a blade. Seren stopped breathing. The mark beneath her dress began to burn, a phantom heat that pulsed with every beat of her heart. Surely he could feel it. Surely he would stop this. Surely he would speak a different name, her name, and announce what had been chosen already in darkened bedrooms where 2 souls had recognized each other before the world had a chance to object. Ryland stepped to the microphone. She heard it in the way his footfalls landed. They were wrong. Heavy. Flat. Without the loose grace she had learned by ear over 7 months. Even his breath sounded wrong to her. Slow. Mechanical. "I choose." His voice rang out, hollow as an empty room. "Vesper Halloran." The ballroom erupted. Applause crashed against the marble. Cheers rose. Glasses clinked. The strategic alliance that would secure the Dominion's Western operations for a generation had just been sealed in front of cameras from every major outlet in the country. And Seren felt something inside her shatter. The mark on her hip flared with searing pain. She gasped, doubling over against the wall, one hand flying to the place where his teeth had claimed her months ago. It burned as if the bite itself was being ripped from her body. She could hear him, even through the cheering. She could hear him accept the handshake. She could hear him thank the assembled elders. She could hear the low, cultured murmur of Vesper's voice saying something polished into his ear. He did not pause. He did not falter. He did not seem to remember she existed. A sob tore out of her. She pressed her free hand against her mouth to smother the sound, then turned and moved down the corridor faster than a blind woman had any business moving, counting the steps by memory, alone. Her cane tapped once against the wall, and she corrected without slowing. The staff entrance was 17 paces past the pantry door. She had practiced the route 3 times in the last 2 days. She had known, somehow, that she would need it. The child, his child, growing inside her while he placed another woman's hand in his on national television. She would not stay in this tower. She would not stay in this city. She would not remain in the apartment where she had given him every piece of herself, where she had believed every promise, where she had been foolish enough to think a blind girl from nowhere could hold the attention of a king forever. She reached the service elevator and pressed the button she had memorized. Down. Down to the loading dock. Down to the cold. Goodbye, my love, she whispered against the closing doors. May you find the peace you chose over me. And she walked out into the winter night, her cane sweeping an arc in front of her, snow striking her face like small blades. She did not see the figure standing on the high balcony above the loading dock. She did not see the amber eyes that flickered suddenly, desperately, into awareness. She did not hear the howl of anguish that tore out of him moments later, a sound so raw that wolves in penthouses across the city lifted their heads in shared grief. By the time Ryland reached the apartment she had kept, Seren was already gone. 3 months later, the mountain town of Hollowbrook had almost forgotten it had a newcomer. Seren had arrived in the dead of winter, a young widow, she told them, seeking quiet after the kind of loss she could not talk about. The landlady at the edge of the tree line had taken pity on her cane and her haunted face and her swollen coat, and rented her the small cabin for less than it was worth. In exchange, Seren had offered what she knew how to offer. She transcribed audio recordings for a legal office 2 towns over. She ran grief counseling sessions by phone on weekday evenings. She could not see the clients who called her, but she could hear everything they were not saying, and in a town this small, word traveled fast. By the end of her 2nd month, she had become simply the blind woman who listened. Now spring was trying to push through the last ridges of frost on the roof, and Seren had built a quiet life out of pieces she had never expected to need. She made tea by touch and sound and steam. She paid her bills in cash. She walked the same 2 routes through the town each week, counting her footsteps, trusting her cane, never asking anyone for help. And every night, she lay awake with her hands on her growing belly, feeling the child kick against her palms. Sometimes the movements came from 2 sides at once, as if 2 tiny feet were pushing in different directions, and the midwife who stopped by on Fridays had begun hinting that perhaps Seren was carrying more blessings than she had realized. Seren tried not to think about what that might mean. "You are strong," she whispered to them in the dark. "Stronger than your father." The thought of Ryland still sent pain knifing through her chest. 3 months, and nothing about the hurt of it had softened. If anything, it had deepened, as if something was holding the wound open from the inside. The mark on her hip had never cooled. She had pressed her fingers to it in the shower every morning, searching for the smooth skin that was supposed to come with rejection. Among wolf kind, a severed bond was meant to fade within weeks. The mark should have flattened into nothing, leaving her with only the memory of teeth and whispered promises. Instead, it stayed raised. It pulsed with heat that woke her from sleep. It ached when the wind came in from the east, from the direction of Blackridge, and sometimes, late at night, She could have sworn she felt something through it. Awareness. Someone reaching. A desperation she could almost name. But that was not possible. Ryland had chosen another woman. The bond between them was supposed to dissolve the moment his voice spoke a different name into a microphone, unless the bond had never actually been severed. Seren pushed the thought down. False hope was the worst kind of poison, and she had no antidote for it. A knock at her cabin door. She rose slowly, one hand to her belly for balance, and followed her cane to the entry. "Miss Nell?" The voice belonged to Inez, the daughter of the man who ran the hardware store. 16 years old, sharp as winter wind, and the only person in Hollowbrook who had actually asked her questions beyond her name. "What is it, child?" "Something happened in the city." Seren's heart seized. "Which city?" "Blackridge." Inez's voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "My uncle drove a delivery down there yesterday. He came back this morning. He says the place is not right." "In what way not right?" "Ryland Thorne." Inez paused as if the name itself were dangerous. "People are saying he has lost his mind." The floor shifted under Seren's feet. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. "His mind?" "He has been tearing everything apart looking for a woman. Nobody will say who. My uncle says the Dominion buildings are half empty because Mr. Thorne has sent every one of his security teams across the state with her photograph. He has offered a reward of $1 million for real information." "$1 million, Miss Nell." Serene's hand moved to her belly. The baby kicked sharply, twice, once on each side. "They say his company is bleeding money," Inez went on in a whisper. "The board is meeting in emergency sessions. They say the wolves loyal to him have been fighting among themselves. One of them went feral in a parking garage last week and had to be put down. In the middle of a city. $1 million. A photograph being shown to strangers. A man unraveling so visibly that even teenagers in mountain towns were whispering about it." "Thank your uncle for the news," Seren said, keeping her voice perfectly even. "But the troubles of rich men are not ours." When Inez was gone, Seren sank into the chair by the window, both hands flat on her belly. He was looking for her. Why would a man search for a woman he had publicly replaced on national broadcast? Why would he burn down his own empire to find a lover he had discarded in front of cameras? Unless something had been done to him that night. Unless the flat, mechanical footfalls she had heard through the wall had meant something she had been too broken to recognize. Her mark pulsed, harder than it had in weeks. She gasped and pressed her hand to her hip. And this time, beneath the heat, she felt it clearly. A presence pushing against the edges of her mind. Not a dream. Not a memory. Something alive. Something close. Her babies kicked violently, together, as if responding to a sound only they could hear. "No," she breathed. She rose and moved to the window, though she could not look out of it. She lifted her face to the glass anyway, the way blind women sometimes do when they want to feel sunlight they cannot see. The cold radiated through the pane, and beyond it, from the tree line at the edge of her property, she felt them. She could not see them. She did not need to. Wolves. Several of them. Large. Standing perfectly still in the snow, watching her cabin with an intelligence that was not animal at all. They had found her. The mark on her hip exploded with heat. She gasped and stumbled backward, her cane clattering against the floor. The pain was nothing like the low burn she had lived with. This was a forge pressed into her skin. And underneath it, the presence in her mind sharpened into a single, searing thought that was not her own. Alive. She is alive. A fist slammed against her door. Not a knock. A demand. "Miss Nell." A male voice, older, unfamiliar, careful in the way men are careful when they are trying not to frighten someone. "Please open the door. We have not come to hurt you." Seren laughed. One short and broken sound, because a blind pregnant woman being hunted by wolves was apparently not an emergency to this man. She could not run. She knew that. A root cellar would hide her from eyes but not from noses. The back door would put her into the tree line where the wolves were already waiting. She retrieved her cane. She steadied her breath. She opened the door. 3 men stood on her porch. She could smell the 2 behind him instantly, the iron and pine scent of alpha security, and the kind that had once stood in her apartment hallway so long ago. But it was the one in front who filled the doorway in a way she could not entirely explain. An older scent, controlled and slow-burning. "Miss Cade?" he said, and her true name landed in her chest like a fallen stone. "My name is Corwin Ash. I am Chief of Staff to Mr. Thorne. I have been looking for you for a very long time." "You have the wrong person," Seren said, and was distantly proud of how steady her voice held. "My name is Nell. I am a widow. I transcribe court audio." Corwin's voice softened, not with pity, but with something closer to grief. "You are Seren Cade, formerly employed as a sensory consultant at Thorn Dominion, last seen at the Covenant Gala on the 7th of January. You carry Rylan Thorne's mark on your left hip and his child in your body." Her cane trembled in her hand. "How do you know about the mark?" "Because Mr. Thorne has described it to every security officer in his company, because he has not slept more than an hour at a time in 3 months. Because he is dismantling an empire to find the woman he lost." Corwin paused. "May I come in?" She wanted to refuse. Her legs were shaking, her mark was searing, and her babies had gone very, very still. She stepped aside. Corwin entered alone, leaving his men on the porch. He did not pretend not to look around. She could hear his careful inventory of the cabin, the little life she had stitched together out of borrowed things. "He did not choose her," he said after a moment. "Vesper. He did not choose her in any sense that holds up in law or ethics." Seren's knees nearly folded. "What are you saying?" "The night of the Covenant, someone introduced a compound into his drink before he went on stage. A derivative of a substance originally developed for interrogation work. It suppressed his wolf and temporarily severed his access to the bond. He has no memory of speaking Vesper's name. He woke 3 days later in his private wing screaming yours. That is not possible. We thought so too, until we pulled the footage frame by frame and found the moment his pupils changed." Seren sank into the nearest chair. Mechanical. Hollow. She had heard it and not known what she was hearing. It had not been rejection. It had been violation. "Who did it?" she whispered. "We have suspicions. We cannot yet prove them in court. The Halloran family has wanted their daughter at the head of Thorn Dominion for over a decade. With you gone and Rylan bound to Vesper through public witness, they would effectively control the western seaboard." Corwin knelt by her chair. "Miss Cade, Mr. Thorne is unwell. The severed bond is killing him by degrees. If we do not bring you home soon, his wolf will take him permanently. And an alpha of his strength, feral, is not something any of us should want to see." She pressed her hands to her belly. "I cannot go back. They will kill me. They will kill my children. Which is why I have not yet told him exactly where you are." Corwin drew a folded paper from his coat and pressed it into her hands. "This arrived at our offices 3 weeks ago. One of our people intercepted it." The texture of the paper was expensive. The broken seal at the top was pressed with a shape she had felt once, years ago, at a formal function. A hawk in flight. The Halloran crest. Corwin read it aloud for her, his voice flat. "The false mate has been located. The problem will be resolved before the next new moon. Long live the Dominion. Long live Vesper." Seren's blood turned to ice. "Assassins," she breathed. "We do not know how many. We do not know how close. But Miss Cade, Mr. Thorne will find you with or without my help. The bond is pulling him toward you every hour. By this time next week, He will be standing on this porch whether I guide him or not. As if to confirm him, the mark on her hip flared again. He felt that, Corwin said quietly. Every time yours burns, his answers. It is the only thing keeping him on a leash. Before he could say more, a howl cut through the evening air from the tree line. Close, warning. Corwin was on his feet in a breath. They are here. Through her senses, Seren felt it. New wolves. Different from the ones before. Coordinated. Moving in a formation she recognized from her father's old military stories. And leading them, walking through the snow toward her cabin with something mechanical in her hand, was a single human figure whose scent Seren recognized from one long-ago corporate function. Vesper's younger sister had come to finish the job. Nira Halloran's voice called through the evening air, light and almost amused. "Open the door, little widow. Let us make this quick." The first shot shattered the front window before Seren could draw breath to scream. Corwin moved faster than a man his age should have been able to, lifting her bodily and shoving her into the kitchen as the glass exploded across the hardwood. From the porch, the two guards were already shifting mid-stride, the shred of cloth and bone crack of transformation giving way to the heavy rush of clawed feet on snow as they charged into the tree line. "The cellar," Corwin ordered. "Now." "There is nothing in the cellar," Seren gasped. "You only need to last until the rest of our people arrive." Another round punched through the wall beside her, buried itself in the cabinet, and the smell that rose off it was not gunpowder. It was something chemical, sharp, industrial. She knew that smell. She had tasted it on Ryland's skin in grainy replays of the gala she had listened to 100 times in her head. "It is not bullets," she breathed. "It is the compound. They are not here to take me alive." Corwin's jaw went rigid against her ear. No witnesses. Not this time. He pressed something into her hands. Small, cold, steel. A folded blade, opened. "It is edged with a wolf silver alloy," he said. "It will cut one of them if it has to. Keep it close." Then she heard it. A short yelp from the tree line. A second, higher. Silence. One of the guards was down. Corwin's breath turned ragged for half a second, and she felt his wolf rising to the surface in a rush of heat so intense it warmed the cabin. "Stay here. Stay down. Do not come out until you hear my voice." Or his. And then he was gone. The shift tearing through him so fast it felt like wind slamming the door. She stood alone in the ruin of her little kitchen, the folded blade cold in her hand, the shattered window letting in knives of winter air. She could hear the fight outside. She could hear the wolves meeting in the snow, the hard thud of bodies, and the metal snap of human weapons. She could hear Corwin's voice drop into a snarl that was no longer anything like speech. And underneath it all, her mark was screaming. Ryland was close. Not just his people. Him. She could feel him through the bond, as clearly as if someone had struck a tuning fork against her hip. Rage so vast it was almost its own weather. Fear of a kind she had never felt from him before. And beneath both, a longing so enormous it made her eyes water uselessly. She heard Corwin go down. It was a specific sound. A grunt, a heavy impact against wood, a soft breath that did not finish. She could hear 3 wolves circling where he had fallen, their paws crunching the snow in the slow, patient rhythm of animals that knew their prey was done. He was losing. Her fingers tightened on the blade. She could stay in the ruined cabin. She could obey. She could hide and hope and pray that Ryland arrived before the wolves finished her protector and came through her doorway. She had hidden for 3 months. She had folded herself smaller and smaller, quieter and quieter, until she had almost disappeared. Not anymore. She set the blade on the counter. She pressed her palms together. And she reached for the thing inside her that she had spent her whole life refusing to reach for. Her mother had called it the old sight. The family had warned her never to speak of it. A blind girl with any kind of inherited gift was a target in a world that already wanted to turn her into a tragedy. But she was already a target. They had already come to kill her. What did she have left to protect by staying small? Heat bloomed in her palms, soft at first, then rising into something pure and ancient. Warmth that poured up her arms and pooled in the center of her chest where Ryland's mark answered it. She did not see the light she was making. She did not have to. Corwin later told her, much later, that when she stepped out of that cabin onto the porch, she had glowed like sunrise breaking through fog. He said the assassin wolves stopped mid-strike. He said even the one circling him lifted its head and whimpered. Seren walked out barefoot into the bloodied snow, her cane abandoned on the counter. She did not need it here. Her gift made the shape of the world for her. She could feel Corwin 20 paces to her left, heavy on the ground. She could feel the 3 wolves around him. She could feel the human figure standing farther back, scentless with chemical suppressant, utterly still. "You will not have him," Seren said, and her voice carried harmonics that were not entirely human. "You will not have any of them." She knelt beside Corwin and pressed her glowing hands to the worst of his wounds. He drew in a sharp, cracked breath as the heat poured into him, closing torn flesh and setting broken ribs back into place. One of the assassin wolves lunged at her from behind. The light around her flared into a sunburst. The wolf was flung back 10 paces, its fur smoking, and scrambled away into the trees with a yelp, 2 of its companions breaking formation to follow, but not all of them ran. "Astonishing," a woman's voice said, cold and unhurried from the edge of the porch. "My sister will be so interested to learn that the billionaire's blind lover is also a witch." Seren's light flickered. She had poured more into Corwin than she realized. Her reserves were not built for this. She heard the small, familiar click of a safety being flicked off. Naira Halloran's finger tightened on the trigger. And then the forest exploded. Trees splintered like matchsticks. The ground shook. She could feel the remaining assassin wolves scatter in raw animal terror, breaking formation entirely, running back into the dark. Naira swung her weapon toward the sound. She was not fast enough. Something moved through the tree line at a speed Seren could not track, even with her other senses. A shape so massive it displaced the air and shook the porch beneath her knees. She felt the heat of it. She felt the fury of it. It crossed the clearing in what seemed like a single heartbeat. She heard Nira's scream cut short. She heard the crunch of bone. She heard the body hit the dark edge of the yard with a dull, final thud. And then silence, except for the massive breathing of whatever had just saved her life. The thing in the clearing turned. She felt the weight of its attention land on her, and her mark answered it in a way no other sensation in 3 months had come close to. She could not see him. She did not need to. The wolf walked toward her slowly, each step deliberate. Blood dripped from his jaw onto the snow. His shadow fell across her face, and even that, she felt. When he finally stopped in front of her, he lowered his enormous head and pressed his nose, very gently, against her belly. Both babies kicked at once, answering him. The wolf made a sound that was almost a whimper. "Ryland," she breathed. The shift happened in the space between one of her heartbeats and the next. One moment, a wolf the size of a warhorse stood before her. The next, a man was kneeling in the blood-stained snow, his hands hovering inches from her body, afraid to touch. She heard him freeze. He had seen her. For the first time in 3 months, he had seen her. Blind, barefoot, in a borrowed coat, in the cold. Pregnant with children he had not known existed. Covered in the light of a gift she had been forced to use to stay alive. She could not see him looking at her, but she felt it. And through the bond, through the mark that had never healed, she felt the moment the most powerful alpha in the country began to weep. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times during the long months of exile. She had imagined his anger, his corporate coldness, his lawyers, the rustle of paperwork demanding she sign something, the rehearsed indifference of a man who had publicly chosen another woman and expected her to crawl back anyway. She had never imagined him on his knees in blood-stained snow, making the small broken sounds of a man unraveling in real time. "You are alive," Ryland breathed. His voice was raw, scraped from the inside out, as if he had spent months screaming in rooms she had not been in. "You are alive. And you are. Seren, you are." She heard him swallow. She heard the shift of his weight. She heard the moment his hand rose toward her belly and stopped, hovering. "May I?" he asked. The question broke something in her chest that had been holding itself together for a very long time. The man whose signature moved markets on 3 continents was asking a blind woman for permission to touch his own child. She reached out and guided his hand to her stomach. The babies kicked immediately, answering him from both sides. She felt him draw in a breath that was not quite steady. His palm flattened against the curve of her coat, and she heard the hitch in him, the slow crumple of a man who had been holding himself upright by force of will for too long. "A child," he whispered. "Our child. Seren, why did you not tell me?" And that broke the spell. She stepped back. She pulled away from his touch, and the cold rushed into the space between them. "Tell you?" Her voice came out sharper than she meant it to. "When would I have told you, Ryland? Before or after you spoke another woman's name into a microphone in front of the entire country?" She heard him flinch, an actual physical recoil she could feel through the air. "I did not choose her. Seren, I would never—" "I heard you." The words came out of her like a blade she had not known she was carrying. "I was in the service corridor. I heard you take her hand. I heard you thank the elders. I heard you stand there and pledge a woman I had never met into a life I was supposed to have, while I hid behind a wall like a mistake. I was drugged." Ryland's voice was rising. "Your Mr. Ash told you. The Hallorans compromised my drink before I went on stage. I remember nothing of that night except waking 3 days later to find your apartment empty and your phone disconnected." "How convenient," she said, and her heart cracked on the word even as her mouth delivered it. "Convenient?" The word came out of him as a snarl, and the air in front of her turned warmer with the heat of his wolf rising. "You think any piece of this has been convenient? I have spent 3 months hunting you, 3 months fighting my own wolf for control, 3 months watching my company hemorrhage value while I sent every resource I had across the country, looking for the woman who disappeared from my life without leaving me so much as a note. Because you rejected me. Because I was taken from myself." The roar of it shook the air in the clearing. A bird lifted out of the tree line behind her. Somewhere to her left, she heard Corwin let out a slow breath. "Do you think I chose this?" Ryland went on, quieter, shaking. "Do you think I wanted to wake up bound to a woman I can barely look at while the woman I loved was gone, and our bond was screaming in my chest with no way to reach her? Do you think any part of me chose that? Seren, I have not slept a full night since you left." His voice cracked on her name, and she heard in that crack the thing she had never expected to hear from him. Vulnerability. Raw, stripped bare vulnerability, from a man whose public face did not allow for such things. Her anger faltered, because she had felt it too, every night of her exile. The bond that was supposed to be dead, pulsing against her hip. The sense of him reaching, always reaching, like a lighthouse on the other side of a fog she could not cross. "I thought you had thrown me away," she whispered. "I thought everything you had told me was a lie. I thought I had been the rehearsal. The arrangement you kept quiet until you could find someone your board approved of." She heard him move, 2 steps in the snow. Then his hands, warm and shaking, lifting her face the way he always had, 2 fingers under her chin, thumb at her cheekbone, the exact pressure she had known by feel for 7 months. "Listen to me," Ryland said, and his voice was so close now she could taste the air he was breathing. You are not my rehearsal. You are not my arrangement. You are my mate. The bond recognized you before I did. Do you think I would throw that away for politics? For a public offering? For anything in this world on any day it exists? She felt the warmth of him, the scent she had tried and failed to forget. The steady pounding of his pulse through her fingertips where they rested against his wrist. A sob broke in her throat. She had held it inside for so long, had walled herself up around it, had taught herself to breathe without letting it out. Now, with his hands on her face and his breath against her mouth, the wall crumbled. I waited for you that night, she choked out. I sat in my apartment with the lights off, because I could not stand to hear the lamp hum. I was going to tell you about the babies. I had practiced the words. I had picked the sentence. I had even thought about which of your hands I would put on me first. Seren. And when you did not come, I went to the tower. I stood in the service corridor. I heard you. I heard you give her your voice. I heard you give her what you had promised me. Her fist rose and struck his chest. It was not a blow. It was a sound. Do you know what that felt like? Ryland. Do you? He caught her wrist and pressed her palm flat against his heart, and she felt it then, the thundering of him, the wildness under the tailored shirt, the wolf she had only ever met in private. Yes, he said. I do. Because I have spent every moment since I came back to myself living with the knowledge that something was done to me that used my voice to destroy the one person I was never going to let go of. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, clutching. I have not touched Vesper, Ryland went on. Not once. Not since the moment I woke. I had her removed from the building. The board thinks I have lost my mind. 3 of the corporate PACs have withdrawn support. 2 more are threatening public statements. His laugh was a dry, broken thing. Let them. I would burn every share of Thorn Dominion to ash before I would let anyone but you stand beside me at the next public event. The mark on her hip flared with heat, and she felt his answering pulse through the bond, and her body recognized him in a way her mind had been forbidding itself to name. Ryland. She swallowed. The Hallorans sent assassins. They were not trying to take me. They were trying to finish me. His arms came around her very slowly, as if he was afraid she might dissolve. Then the Hallorans will learn what it costs to put their hands on what is mine. A quiet sound came from behind them. Corwin, upright now, still unsteady, blood stiffening on his shirt but walking. Mr. Thorne, the beta said, voice carefully level. The shooter is identified. It was Naira Halloran, Vesper's younger sister. The name hung between them like the after-echo of a gunshot. Then they have openly attempted to kill the true heirs of Thorn Dominion. Ryland's voice was steel and ice and something older. There is no pretense left. This is war. His hand moved back to her belly, cradling the curve through the coat as if it were the most precious thing in the world. They came for my mate. They came for my children. They came for my voice. I am done letting them have any of it. A phone buzzed in Corwin's jacket, then another, and another, and another. Not just in his coat, but in the coats of the other security officers now stepping out of the tree line, approaching cautiously, staring at Seren in a way she could feel even without seeing. Corwin lifted the first phone, his breath cut off. Mr. Thorne, he said, you are going to want to hear this. Ryland took the phone without moving from her side. He listened for exactly 4 seconds before his body locked, a stillness more violent than any shout she had ever heard from him. Say that again, he said. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop. Seren reached out and found his wrist with her fingertips. What is it? Ryland's voice was very, very quiet. Thorn Tower has just been seized. The Hallorans walked in through the front doors half an hour ago. They have the executive floor. They have the board. They have our people. He turned his face down toward her, and she could feel the storm of him against her cheek. And they are broadcasting our failure live, Seren, to every shareholder in the country. The flight to Blackridge should have taken 2 hours. Ryland's jet made it in 90 minutes. Serene sat curled against his chest in the wide leather seat at the front of the cabin, his arm locked around her waist, his body shielding her from the hum of the engines. She had tried to protest at first, tried to argue that she could sit upright, that she could hold her own, and that she had done so for 3 months alone in a cabin. Ryland had simply lifted her into his lap and silenced her with a look she could not see but felt. "My wolf needs you this close," he had said, his voice rough with something that was only half human. 3 months of separation nearly killed us both. I am not letting you out of contact with my body until the bond is complete, and every Halloran is either in a cell or in the ground. So she had given in. She had let her head rest against the place where his heart beat under the expensive shirt. She had let his free hand stay flat on the curve of her belly. The babies, for the first time in weeks, had gone still and peaceful, as if they too understood that the missing part of the world had been found. As the plane tore through the dark, Ryland told her everything. He told her about waking on the morning of the 4th day in his private wing, finding Vesper in his bathroom with the audacity to be selecting towels. About the scream that had torn out of him when he understood what had been spoken in his voice the night before. About throwing her out through security and ordering she confined pending a full forensic review. He told her about the search that had eaten him alive, the private investigators hired in every state, the contracts offered to every detective agency west of the Mississippi. The nights he had spent in his office rewatching her old voicemails on his personal phone, listening to her voice say ordinary things. "Buying you coffee. I am on the bus. I am coming up in 5 minutes. My wolf knew you were alive," he murmured into her hair. "The bond never fully broke. Every time I tried to accept that I had lost you, I would feel a pulse of warmth somewhere in my chest, and I would know you were still out there, still breathing, waiting." Serene's hand moved to cover his where it rested on her belly. "I felt it too," she admitted. "The mark that never cooled. The dreams that did not feel like dreams." Rylan went very still against her. "You dreamed of me. Every night. You came to my bedroom. I could not see you, of course. But I knew your step. I knew your weight on the mattress. You told me you loved me. You told me you would find me. You told me to hold on. I thought it was my mind trying to keep itself from breaking in half. Those were not dreams." Ryland's voice was hoarse. "When I slept, my wolf reached for you. I believed it was wishful thinking. I did not know you were actually—" He trailed off, overcome. Seren shifted in his lap to face him. She lifted her hands and found his face in the dim cabin light, tracing the shape of him with her fingertips. The jaw rougher than she remembered, the cheekbones sharper. The skin beneath his eyes hollowed in a way that told her more than any mirror ever could. "You have not been eating," she said softly. "Nothing tasted right. You have not been sleeping. I could not, without you. You have been killing yourself, Ryland." His hand came up and covered hers against his cheek. "Slowly," he admitted. "Very slowly. And I had made peace with it." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The jet hummed around them. Somewhere on a distant line, the Halloran forces were broadcasting her death sentence to the world. She did not care. The man she had grieved for 3 months had been grieving her in return, and the universe had given them 90 minutes to remember that fact. "Never again," Ryland said. "Whatever the next hours cost us, we do not do this apart." He tipped his face and kissed her. It was tentative at first, questioning, as if he was not sure his mouth still belonged to hers. But when her hand slid up around the back of his neck and pulled him closer, something inside both of them caught fire. The bond roared to life. Seren gasped against his mouth as sensation flooded through her. His emotions crashed into hers with a force she had not been prepared for. Love, huge and unguarded. Desire, straining at the edges of his control. Relief so absolute it felt like something breaking. And underneath all of it, a fierce protectiveness that wrapped around her like armor against the world. And something else. For the first time in 3 months, she saw. Not sight exactly. Not the kind of seeing other people did. But impressions. Color shapes bleeding through the bond from him. The warm gold of the cabin light on his skin. The deep, deep black of his jacket. The shape of his face emerging, not from her memory, but from his own awareness of the man he was, filtered through the bond into her mind. She pulled back with a small, broken sound. "Seren," Rylan whispered. "What is it?" "I saw you." Her fingers clutched at his shirt. "For a moment. I saw you. Through the bond." His breath caught, and before he could answer, the cabin intercom crackled. "Mr. Thorne, you are going to want to come forward. We have a situation with the tower feed." Rylan did not move. His hand stayed flat against her cheek. "Come forward with me," he said. "Whatever is on that screen, we see it together." She did not tell him she could not see it. She understood what he meant. They walked to the forward monitor arm in arm, and Corwin was already standing there, his face as grim as she had ever heard it. "They have opened the 38th floor to the press," Corwin said. "Silas Halloran has taken the board hostage in the executive boardroom. He is standing in front of cameras claiming Mr. Thorne has suffered a mental break and is unfit to lead. He is demanding your return to face evaluation by an independent medical panel." Rylan's voice was ice. "And if I refuse?" "He has 32 of our people in the boardroom. Board members, executive assistants, your personal staff." Corwin hesitated. "Including Miss Odette Vance." The name hit Seren like a hand to the chest. Odette. The head of sensory accessibility at Thorne Dominion. The woman who had mentored her through her first year at the company, who had slipped her into Ryland's office for the very first meeting, who had looked the other way 100 times when Seren had stayed past the end of the business day. The only person at Thorne Dominion who had ever looked at Seren and seen a full human being. "We have to go in," Seren said. Ryland turned to her at once. "Seren, you cannot walk into that building. If the Hallorans get their hands on you. If we do nothing, 32 people are executed on live television." Her hand found his and locked there. "And Odette is killed because she was kind to me." For a long moment, Ryland did not speak. Then, slowly, she felt him smile against her temple. A fierce smile, a proud smile. The smile of a man who had just been reminded of why he had fallen so hard in the first place. "My queen," he murmured, and the old word landed differently in the modern cabin than it would have anywhere else. Even now, the first person you think of is someone else. He turned to the cabin behind him, where the entire flight of loyal Thorne Dominion security officers had risen in silence, waiting for his word. "The Hallorans have taken our home," he said, and his voice carried the weight of every alpha line that had ever fought for its ground. "They believe they have won. They believe my absence and their broadcast will be enough to keep the board in line." He lifted Seren's hand, still joined with his, where every officer could see it. "They are wrong. Tonight we take Thorne Tower back. Tonight, the country sees exactly who walks back into that building with me." A low sound rose among the officers. Not a cheer. Something deeper. The resonant hum of wolves acknowledging their alpha. The jet began its descent. And Seren, blind and cold and carrying 2 heartbeats under her coat, walked with her bonded alpha toward a tower full of enemies who had not yet learned what a wronged Omega could do. The retaking of Thorne Tower was brief and brutal. The Hallorans had been prepared for resistance. They had not been prepared for an army of Thorne Dominion wolves, driven by 3 months of absence, and a king whose bond had just been reopened with a force that was reshaping his behavior in real time. Seren listened from a secure operations center 2 blocks away, headphones pressed to her ears, her hands flat on a glass table that vibrated gently with every explosion in the distance. She could feel Ryland through the bond, fury, precise and lethal. His breath, the moment he climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevators, the moment he passed the 7th floor, the moment he passed the 12th. A Thorn security specialist described the progress to her in a calm, steady voice that refused to talk down. The lobby is secure. Teams are advancing floor by floor. Non-lethal force where possible. The Halloran private security forces are surrendering faster than we expected. Mr. Thorn has just breached the 30th floor. The 30th, 8 floors below the boardroom. Casualties on our side, Seren asked. Minor. 2 injured. None critical. And theirs? They are not fighting like men who believed they would have to. Good, she thought. Let them learn they were wrong. A second voice crackled over the line. Corwin, from somewhere inside the tower. Miss Cade, I need you to listen to me carefully. Silas Halloran has barricaded himself on the 38th floor with the hostages. He has cameras positioned on 3 of them. He is demanding that Mr. Thorne surrender himself publicly in front of the building, on his knees, for evaluation by a Halloran-selected medical panel. If Mr. Thorne does not comply within the hour, he will begin executing hostages on the broadcast. He says he will start with Miss Vance. The floor of the operations center tilted under Seren's feet. I am coming to the tower, she said. Miss Cade, Mr. Thorne's instructions were absolutely clear. You are not to leave this building under any circumstances. Corwin. Her voice was very, very quiet. I am coming to the tower. She was already walking toward the door, her cane finding the edge of the table, her coat gathered over her belly with one hand. 2 security officers moved to intercept her. She heard them hesitate. She heard their training war with the authority pouring out of her in a way she had not known she could produce. Step aside, she said. They stepped aside. By the time Corwin met her at the loading dock of Thorn Tower, the 36th floor had fallen and the 37th was being cleared. She could feel Ryland in a stairwell above her, bloody, breathing hard, almost incandescent with rage. He is going to lose his mind when he sees you here, Corwin warned her as he guided her through a secured service corridor. He already has. I am the only thing that can settle him. They rode a secured elevator to the 37th floor. She stepped out into a hallway that smelled of ozone and cordite and alpha sweat, and she followed the pull of the bond to the exact door where Ryland was. He was arguing with someone. Hard. She is not coming up here. That is not a request. Put her on a helicopter and get her out of this state. Ryland. He stopped mid-sentence at the sound of her voice. She heard him turn. Seren, what in every hell are you doing in this building? Exactly what you would do if our places were reversed, she said calmly. Go back to the operations center. No. Seren, I love you, she said. The hallway went very quiet. In all the nights they had stolen, all the messages they had exchanged, all the careful intimacies they had hidden from the board and the press and the world, neither of them had said those 3 words aloud. They had circled them. They had written around them. They had never let them leave the body. I love you, Ryland. Her voice did not shake. I loved you when I thought you had chosen another woman. I loved you through every day of my exile. I loved you in the middle of the snow this afternoon when I thought you might walk away from me on the floor. I am not letting that love make me someone who hides while Odette is executed on a live stream. She felt the moment his knees almost gave out. She felt the moment he pulled himself upright again. What are you going to do? I am going to walk into that boardroom. I am going to trade myself for the hostages, and you are going to trust me. Seren, they will kill you. No, they will not. She reached up and pressed her fingertips to his lips before he could argue. He kissed her fingers once. Then he lowered his forehead to hers, and she felt the trust pour out of him like a dam breaking. "Make it fast," he said. "Be ready when I call." She turned toward the end of the hallway, where the executive boardroom door was flanked by two Halloran security agents who had not yet processed what was happening. "Mr. Halloran," she called out. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was carried by the bond and the old sight, and something even older that had begun to rise in her chest for the last 10 minutes. "I am Seren Cade, the woman your family has been trying to erase. I am coming in." Alone. Silence from inside the boardroom. Then a silken male voice she recognized from a corporate holiday function years ago. "By all means, Miss Cade. We have been wondering when you would find the courage." She walked the hallway alone. The doors opened in front of her. The smell inside was not the smell of a boardroom. It was the smell of fear. 32 human beings zip-tied along the far wall. Cameras on tripods aimed at them, armed Halloran personnel behind them with weapons drawn. And at the head of the long mahogany table, in the chair that belonged to Ryland, sat Silas Halloran, his scent confirmed by a bottle of his personal aftershave she remembered from a distance. Beside him stood Vesper. "So, this is the creature who has caused so much fuss," Vesper said, her voice curling around each word with disdain. "A blind Omega with a pregnancy. How unimpressive." Seren ignored her. She turned her face toward the wall where the hostages were kneeling. "Odette. Child?" The voice came from the second-to-last position. Weak, shaking, unmistakable. "Run, little one. Run while you can." "I am done running," Seren said. She turned back to the head of the table. "Mr. Halloran, you want Ryland to surrender. I am offering you something better." "And what is that?" "Me, the mother of the Thorn heirs. Take me. Let the others go." "Father, wait!" Vesper interjected sharply. "We end her now." "Patience, Vesper." She heard Silas smile. "A dead Omega is worth nothing. A living one, carrying the Thorn bloodline in her body, is the lever that ends this family forever. Release the board. Secure Miss Cade." She heard the zip ties being cut. She heard the hostages stumbling forward, weeping, some of them calling her name. She felt Odette try to reach her and be pushed back by a Halloran rifle. Rough hands closed around Seren's arms. She let them, because under her coat, under her skin, under the silence of 3 months of folding herself small, something was beginning to move. The babies stirred, both of them at once, and the power she had used on the cabin porch, the old sight she had reached for, lifted in her chest with a force she had never touched before. The children in her body were not ordinary children. They were the product of a true bond, the kind that had not been conceived in the Thorn bloodline in more than 100 years. And they were not going to let their mother be taken. Heat bloomed under her skin, the kind of heat she had felt once, on the porch. But this was larger. This was wilder. This was not the old sight. This was the wolf. "No," she gasped, her knees giving. "Not now. Please, not here." She had never shifted in her life, not once. She had been told, gently and repeatedly by every doctor her family could afford, that her blindness was the body's way of refusing the wolf, that she would never carry that part of her inheritance. They had been wrong. The shift was coming whether she was ready or not. The board members still on their feet were staring at her. Silas was rising from his chair. Vesper was screaming something, and somewhere behind her, very close now, she heard the stairwell door explode off its hinges. Ryland. Seren's body arched. Her bones began to move in ways bones were not supposed to move. The pain was enormous and astonishing and almost welcome, because after 3 months of being the still center of everyone else's story, the universe was finally asking her to become something. She only prayed she lived long enough to meet her mate on the other side of it. The shift was not the transformation she had been warned about. The doctors had told her, year after year, that if her body ever did find the wolf, it would be brief, small, unsatisfying. A partial form. The shape of a creature denied its full inheritance by a body that could not see well enough to live as predator. They had been wrong about that too. Every bone in her body broke and remade itself. Every muscle tore and rebuilt itself into something denser and faster. Her skin rippled and split as silver fur pushed through in a wave from her spine outward. She screamed, and the sound that came out of her throat was no longer a human sound. Through the haze, she could feel Ryland fighting his way across the boardroom toward her. His massive wolf form was scattering Halloran's security personnel like leaves in a gale. But he was not fast enough. Silas Halloran had pulled something from beneath the boardroom table. A slim object, dense, metallic. A handgun she had not known was there, tipped with a chemical load she could smell even in this state. "If I cannot control the Thorn bloodline," he snarled, raising the weapon toward her convulsing body, "then no one will." The pop of the firing pin. And then something astonishing happened. A hand closed around the barrel of the gun. Seren's hand. She did not remember willing herself across the boardroom. She did not remember choosing to move. But her fingers, no longer entirely human, wrapped around the hot metal, and the chemical compound stung her palm without going further. Silver-gray fur covered her fingers. Claws she had never grown in her life dug into the steel. "No," she said, and her voice carried a frequency that made every alpha in the boardroom flinch. The shift finished in a surge of warmth that poured up from her feet to the tips of the ears she had not had a moment before. Where a pregnant woman had knelt, a wolf now stood. Her fur was the color of morning mist on water. Silver running into soft gray, the kind of coloring that looked almost luminous under the boardroom lights. She was smaller than Ryland's massive shape, but the air around her buckled with her presence. And she could see. For the first time in her life, Seren could see. The boardroom resolved in front of her in a flood of impossible clarity, the warm brown of the mahogany, the cold white of the recessed ceiling lights, the red spatter on the carpet, the faces of the hostages against the far wall, blinking at her in astonishment. And then she turned her head, and she saw Ryland. She had traced his face with her fingertips 100 times. She had listened to his voice against her ear in the dark. She had pictured him the way a woman who has never seen must picture a man, by careful imagination, by memory of texture. None of it had been right. He was more than she had built in her head. The dark hair that fell across his forehead exactly as she had felt it fall. The jaw she had mapped with her thumbs. The eyes, startling amber against the silver of her own fur. And the way he was looking at her now, not as an alpha or a king or a billionaire, but as a man who had just watched his wife walk back from a place he had never thought to find her. His wolf made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "You shifted." His voice came to her through the bond, rough with disbelief. "Seren. You shifted." "I had reasons," she replied, surprised by how natural it was to think to him without mouths or air. "Tears in your eyes, Wolf? You can see." "For the first time in my life," she told him, her own voice breaking inside her head. "The first face I have ever seen is yours." The bond between them pulsed so hard the floor shook. She did not have time to stay in the moment. She turned back to Silas Halloran, whose broken hand was still trying to work the weapon, and she moved in a blur her sighted mind was not used to yet. Her jaws closed around his wrist with a sound that made the hostages flinch. The gun dropped. He dropped. He screamed. She flung him aside like a coat she had no further use for. Across the boardroom, Vesper shrieked, "Kill her! Someone kill her!" But the remaining Halloran security had stopped moving. They had signed on for a corporate takeover, not to face two fully bonded wolves of a royal bloodline. Their weapons clattered to the carpet. Several raised their hands. 2 dropped to their knees. Ryland reached her side, his black fur pressing against her silver. Through the bond, she felt his awe, his pride, his grief, his joy, all of it braided together into something too big to name. Vesper bent and snatched up her father's dropped weapon. She raised it toward Seren. She never pulled the trigger. Ryland's jaws closed around her wrist, hard enough to force her fingers open, not hard enough to take the hand. He shifted back to human form in a single rushing movement, his arms locking around Vesper's struggling shoulders while his wolves flooded the boardroom from the stairwell doors and secured the rest of the Halloran personnel. "Vesper Halloran," he announced, his voice carrying to the cameras still mounted on their tripods. "You and your father are under citizen's arrest for conspiracy against the leadership of Thorn Dominion, kidnapping with intent to harm, attempted murder of the true heirs of this company, and treason against the Black Ridge Pack. You will face full judgment under Pack law and under federal statute." "You cannot do this," Vesper spat, blood on her teeth. "You chose me, on live broadcast, in front of the country. A drugged man saying a name his handlers have rehearsed is not a man making a choice." Ryland's voice was cold enough to slow the room's breath. "The covenant is void. It was void from the second the compound hit my bloodstream. The entire broadcast will be released to federal prosecutors by the end of the day." Seren shifted back to human. She flowed through the change with a strange, ancient ease, as if her body had simply been waiting for permission. She stood on the boardroom carpet in the torn remains of her coat, one hand on her belly where the babies still moved, and she felt the loss of sight come back over her like a door closing on a lit room. She held the vision of Ryland's face behind her eyes like a candle. He was at her side in 3 strides. Someone brought him a pack jacket from the hallway. He wrapped it around her with careful, trembling hands. "Are you hurt?" he asked, quiet. She took inventory. Her body felt new. The constant ache she had lived with for 3 months, the heaviness of her grief, the low hum of the unhealed mark, all of it was gone. In its place was something that thrummed. "I am well," she said. "Better than well." Ryland's hand found her belly and his breath caught as he felt movement from 2 distinct places. "The baby," he whispered. "Babies?" she corrected softly. "2 of them. I think the shift saved them. I think their own power called mine out." Ryland made a choked sound and pulled her against his chest. Through the bond, she felt the walls he had carried around his heart for 3 months finally dissolve. "I thought I had lost you," he whispered into her hair. "When Silas raised that gun. For half a second, I thought." "I know." She pulled back enough to cup his face in her hands, the way she had in the snow. But this time, because of the bond, she could see the impression of him in her mind, the shape of his worry, the curve of his mouth. "But I am here. I am not going anywhere. Not in this life. Not in any other." Ryland's eyes searched her face. "The bond," he said, hoarse. "It needs to be completed, properly, if you will have me." She thought of everything they had been through. The stolen nights. The 3 months of silence that had been a lie all along. The blood and the snow and the impossible, astonishing moment of a wolf finding her sight for the first time and using it to look at him. "I will have you," she said. "I have always had you, Ryland. From the day my cane tapped the leg of the desk in your office and you stood up before your assistant could." He made a soft sound and lowered his head. "Claim me," he said, and tilted his neck to the side, bearing the pulse point where the mate mark was meant to go. She understood what to do without being told. Her wolf rose to guide her, slow and sure. She leaned into him, pressed her lips to the place where his neck met his shoulder, and felt his heart thundering against her mouth. Her teeth sank into his skin. The bond completed. It was not pain. It was the opposite of pain. It was every piece of the world sliding into the correct position. Every memory he had ever made of her poured into her mind. The first time he had heard her voice on a company phone call and stood very still because something had gone quiet inside him. The first time he had touched the back of her hand at a dinner meeting and almost knocked over his water glass. The first time she had come to his office after hours and he had forgotten every appointment on his calendar and every memory of his search. The hallways he had walked at 3 in the morning with her photo in his hand. The faces he had accused of knowing her whereabouts. The wolf inside him howling night after night against the bars of a cage he could not understand. And everything he saw now when he looked at her. Not a blind omega from nothing. A woman of astonishing courage. A healer. A mother. The only person on earth whose voice made him forget the size of his own company. His fated mate. His home. She in turn poured her memories into him. The long, cold months in Hollowbrook. The mornings she had washed her face with water too cold because she had no money for a better heater. The first time she had felt her babies kick and cried because there was no one in the room to tell. The 1,000 times she had believed him a liar and hated herself for loving him anyway. When she finally lifted her mouth from his skin, they were both trembling. "My queen," Ryland breathed, pressing his forehead to hers. "My king," she answered. And through the bond, she understood something she had not known before. She would never have full sight in her human form again. That was not how her body was made. But when her fingers were on him, when her skin touched his, the bond would open a small, clear window in her mind through which she could see him. His face, his eyes, the exact shape of the smile he rarely gave anyone. For a blind woman who had spent her life imagining faces, it was more than enough. It was an ocean. In the weeks that followed, the Halloran family faced a very modern kind of judgment. Silas Halloran was stripped of his corporate titles, indicted on federal charges for conspiracy and attempted murder, and remanded without bail pending trial. Every executive who had signed off on the operation was named in the indictment alongside him. Vesper Halloran was exiled by unanimous pack vote, stripped of her family name and her place in the pack registry. Her father's private security force was dissolved. The empire they had spent a century building collapsed in 3 weeks. Thorn Dominion steadied. The corporate PACs that had pulled their support came back one by one. The stock recovered. The wolves who had gone feral across the state, driven half-mad by the fracture in their king's bond, returned to their senses as the completed bond settled over the Black Ridge territory like a calm after a long storm. And the people of Thorn Dominion, employees and pack and public alike, accepted their true queen with a warmth that caught Seren off guard. She had expected suspicion, scrutiny of the blind Omega from nowhere who had walked into a war and walked out married. What she found instead was recognition. The wolves of the pack could feel the truth of the completed bond between her and Ryland, and what they felt was what the universe had always intended. On a warm spring evening, in a private suite at the best hospital in Black Ridge, Seren gave birth to twins. A boy with his father's dark hair and, against every expectation, her own silver eyes. A girl who laughed in a way no newborn was supposed to be able to, and whose small fingers curled around Ryland's with a grown wolf's grip. Ryland held his children with tears streaming down his face, his huge hands impossibly gentle. "Thank you," he whispered to Seren, who lay exhausted and radiant in the hospital bed, "for believing in me even when nothing in the world gave you a reason to." Seren reached up and found his face. Her fingers traced the line of the claiming mark at his throat. The silver scar that matched the one on her own hip now. Both healed into something that would carry forward in the telling of this family for a long time. With her fingertips on his skin, the bond opened its small clear window in her mind, and she saw him. "I never stopped," she said quietly. "Even in the worst of it. Something in me knew. The universe does not tear apart two halves of the same soul without finding a way to sew them back together. Ryland leaned down and kissed her, their children held safe between them. In every life, he murmured, you are my heart, Seren, my mate, my home. Somewhere in the city beyond the hospital window, a single wolf lifted its voice in celebration, and then another, and another, until the skyline was ringing with the sound of a pack that had, at long last, remembered how to be whole. And the story that had begun in a service corridor, with a blind woman counting her footsteps by memory, ended with a family curled together on a narrow hospital bed, the cold of a winter night finally and permanently replaced by something warmer. They had been taken from each other by people who believed a voice could be bought and a woman could be erased. They had found each other back in a snowfall, in a boardroom, and in a bond that refused, in the end, to break. And from this day forward, on no day in any life that followed, would they ever be pulled apart again.